like listened, among other things, to Native Americans in the Western, or, people who had met them. What he heard was that Native Americans often looked down their noses at settlers because of all the farming and all of the work that they did, to have that roof over their heads and to have, the few or expanding luxuries that they were seeking, and that it would be better to sort of live a very simple life that they had, where they did take a few risks, but they had a lot of leisure time because it was so much closer to, just subsistence that they were going for in hunter-gatherer type. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do that, but I think, your book, as I understand it, I didn't get all the way through, but I'm like 2/3 way through it, seems to be saying kind of like the other end of that spectrum, which is that maybe we need to like fully automate since we've gotten this far, so that we can have that same sort of leisure, but also have all the kind of amenities of advanced civilization. So is that the aim for you?
Yeah, sort of. I think so. But with some clarification or some stipulations, because I definitely am not on the fully automated gay space communism bandwagon. That's not my cup of tea or my meme. Those people often have never really done any meaningful work. They don't find fulfillment in meaningful labor. And I do. And not only do I don't really matter. I'm a social theorist. What matters here is that large swaths, if not all humans, need meaningful occupations. Right. And I kind of leave it between large swaths of humanity and all of humanity, because I don't know. I don't want to be too broad here, but it does seem true. A lot of people who hate jobs have only worked these meaningless, alienated jobs. And I guess there's this question I'll set off to the side for now about is it pure ideology, this idea of the calling, of the occupation that is not just a career, right? Let's set that aside. And I'm just going to go for now and assume, yes, there are meaningful and real callings that actually people get turned on to, they get sparked, the flame comes alive, and it gives their life meaning and passion, and it makes them something that they couldn't have been otherwise, and they bring something more to the world and to others, and everyone appreciates it because they're spreading that passion. I think a lot of the careers that are noble in name are noble in name because they're like these primordial occupations or these primordial callings, but they get captured by these institutions. And so Illich would, talk about the difference between convivial and manipulative institutions or tools. And Andre Gores takes that a little bit further in his Farewell to the Working Class, which is a super interesting work. Now, what I really like that he does is he talks about the sphere of necessity, and he talks about heteronymous labor being this thing that's necessary for dealing with necessary labor. So there's necessary needs, necessary labor, and heteronomy is going to have to deal with that. And then there's the realm of freedom, or you could say autonomy or cooperation. Autonomy and cooperation are not quite the same thing. Cooperation, you kind of give up autonomy because you're buying into working with other people. And once you are taking on responsibilities with other people, you're sacrificing some degree of autonomy, right? And so he talks about the realm of heteronomy, autonomy, and cooperation. But genuine cooperation would only come after you have entered that space of autonomy, so you can make the choice to be cooperatively engaged with these other people.
And
I love
Rip,
this.
could you define heteronomy?
Yeah, that's a good one, because that's a weird word, but it's like coercion or you're kind of forced to do it. is how I think of it. But let me pull up the actual definition. Define heteronomy. But yeah, no, that's not the right word. That's heteronym. Yeah, it's the state of being controlled by an outside force, or the idea that a person's actions are influenced by external factors. And so, if you're in a work camp your entire life, or if you were a slave, then you could say that your entire life is lived within the sphere of heteronomy. I'd say most working class people live their entire lives in the sphere of heteronomy, that they think that they get outside of it after work. But of course, because they are exhausted, they have really nothing but garbage time or a kind of energy that can't really be harnessed towards their higher human capacities. And so the realm of heteronomy, for him to even say that is, it's kind of edgy. The fact that he was saying this to the new left, which is so, influenced by anarchism, and we can't have any restraints, and we just have to liberate desire. And he's saying, no, guys, like, somebody's still going to have to make the ball bearings. Someone's got to do that. And so that, the idea is to limit that as much as possible. And so bringing it back now to Lori's question, automation, if it can be harnessed, should be harnessed towards the end of restricting the realm of heteronomy as much as possible, which would leave open meaningful callings and fulfilling work that people are going to do no matter what, which would include farming. Yeah.
Gotcha. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, I guess before we get to your book, then how would you lay out, would you identify if you have a problem with historical Marxism at the end of the day? Are you some sort of like a social democrat, or I don't know, some sort of council communist?
I definitely called that sometimes by people. The fact that I have enjoyed some of Paul Maddox's work definitely gets people calling me a council communist, even though I don't subscribe to his politics. I just think he's got some important work. But there's a lot of those sort of left-con people that I can find interesting. But really, I find them all interesting. I think they're all fascinating historical characters. I'm just not convinced that there is a political solution that has a good enough diagnosis of our current situation, and that real new forms of politics are only going to come from a new approach to the situation, right? But with that said, what is my relationship to Marx? That's worth dwelling on for a moment. So I'll just say out the door, I'm not a Marxist because I do not believe in the dictatorship of the proletariat. And for people who really like to gatekeep that term and have these long conversations about whether you are or are not a Marxist, or you're the right kind of a Marxist, I just like to lead with, well, I just don't want to play this game, and so I'm not one. How about that? Deal with it, right? It's like, I would prefer not to. But I can't think outside of relation to capital. And I've read Volume 1 a couple of times. I've read Mihail Heinrich's Introduction to the Three Volumes a couple of times. I've read a bunch of other secondary literature, and then I'm always trying to go back to the three volumes, and I'm one of those weirdos who just lives his whole life underneath the shadow of that stack of books, and is always like trying to think, okay, so capital, the accumulation of surplus value, the mobilization of labor power by capital. What does that actually do to people, right? And I'm very influenced by young Marx, and that part of young Marx that continues in old Marx, which is like that part that cares about alienation, alienated labor. In the Grundrisse, there's a parenthetical where he says the only difference between the worker and the slave is that the worker during the good times in capitalism can at least like attend lectures in the evening and spend time with his children, right? And that statement, it's like, I think the reason he throws it out there as an aside and he never felt the need to write a chapter about it is because it was obvious to everyone. No one felt the need to say it. But 100 years later, Marxism very quickly had just completely lost the plot. I think part of the reason being a sort of a leftoid resentment, right? Like just